This is your Chapter 1, Section 4 presentation, and in this section we're taking a look at the question, what are the functions of the American government? Obviously, this is a question that's so broad it's going to be intertwined in the curriculum throughout the year, but we begin with a broad overview in Chapter 1 because it's just trying to give you the landscape, as it were, of American government. The framers set out the key functions of the American government and the governmental guarantees in the United States Constitution. And one of the key functions that they encoded in the Constitution was the idea of establishing justice. Governments create laws which allow for a common set of principles to live by, and adherence to those principles allows for the rational dispensing of justice by those who diverge from the norm. In other words, governments create laws based on principles that most agree to. The ability to adhere to those allows for justice to be carried out on those who can't meet the demands of society. Thus, the Constitution created a federal judicial system to dispense justice in Article 3. And when we get to Article 3, you'll see that that was a very broad section, but a very brief section. And so the section doesn't necessarily set up the structure, but enables Congress to establish a structure of the federal judicial system. But don't worry too much about that because we're going to go into detail. The Bill of Rights also guaranteed things that move towards the ideal of establishing justice. For instance, demanding a trial by jury, that people be informed of the charges against them, that they are given a trial in a court presided over by an impartial judge. And as we will see, the rights of people under the Bill of Rights have expanded, and the rights of the accused under the Bill of Rights have expanded over time. Ensuring domestic tranquility. The role of the government in securing domestic tranquility, that is, peace within our borders, is debatable. The fact that it has a role, however, is not in question. During times of crisis, for instance, 9/11, the role of the government in ensuring domestic tranquility expands. And as we talk about things like 9/11, we'll talk about some of the things that maybe are controversial, but were created and instituted in order to ensure domestic tranquility or domestic peace within our borders. On a local level, in order to ensure domestic tranquility, we have things like police forces. On a state level, the National Guard. And the federal government can call up troops to quell any threats to order, as well as additional options like federal criminal justice agencies, for instance, the FBI and the ATF or the DEA. Providing for the common defense. One of the purposes of government is to provide for the defense of its citizens against threats of foreign aggression. In fact, many people believe that this was the major function of government. For instance, in the early years, the War of 1812, dealing with the problem of piracy at the seas. A lot of people believe that the reason to have a federal government was to be able to provide for the common defense more than anything else, because the state governments themselves individually wouldn't be capable of doing that on the broad scale necessary at the founding. It still is a major factor, but there is quite a bit of controversy over the extent to which we should be spending. Some believe that we spend too much. Others believe that we don't spend enough. But When we look at the constitutional structures that were set up to be able to provide for the common defense, we can look at things like the president's power as commander-in-chief of the armed forces and Congress's authority to raise an army and declare war. Promoting the general welfare, thought of more of an ideal than a mandate at its founding, providing for the general welfare, has turned into a government that has expanded its involvement in all areas. So what was once thought of as just like a general idealistic thing has become the mantra for a large, expansive government. As the number of people and size of the nation has grown, so has the function of the government in pursuit of this ideal, as I just mentioned. And as I just mentioned, it can be controversial. For instance, is healthcare a fundamental right that the government must guarantee to promote the general welfare? Or is it something that should be dealt with on an individual level that the government should stay out of? That's a debate that's going on in politics today. And then finally, the last function we're going to go over in section 4 is securing the blessings of liberty. Perhaps the best way for citizens to do so is through the freedom to criticize the vote and petition the government when it disagrees with governmental actions or has a grievance. In other words, to secure the blessings of liberty, citizens often have to force the government to do so through the exercise of their First Amendment rights. And so we'll end here, but I do want to mention that beyond that, because that's kind of how your book described it, securing the blessings of liberty might also entail the government making assurances to make sure that each individual is guaranteed liberty against other citizens. In other words, not allowing some individuals to discriminate and oppress other individuals, though some would agree all would agree that that's a good idea. Some would argue the government should be involved in ensuring that. Others would argue that the government should be small and therefore not involved in that pursuit. That's it for Chapter 1, Section 4. So at this point, you should go to Google Classroom, open the essential question Google form, and answer the essential question for Section 4, which you can see at the beginning of this presentation.